since the side event talks of victims and civil society, and since I clearly don't fall less within the meaning of civil society, I'll restrict my comments as to that of a victim. Since you yourself mentioned the assassination of my father, I just thought I'll share with you some of the concerns that will definitely that I have with regards to the way in which his assassination investigation was handled, because I think it's relevant and it's systematic in that it is the same concerns that will plague us in any sort of criminal justice process that we envisage for the grave crimes that were committed against the Tamil people towards the end of the war. I mean, the biggest concern, I mean, we, in all these side events, in most of the side events, most of us, most of the Tamils who are present here in the UN Human Rights Council, many organizations back home, except maybe a few who are collaborating with the government, I think across the board, the demand has been for an international mechanism. And even if we were asked to consider a hybrid process, there is this danger that some of us, maybe because we are not looking at it too deeply, tend to only talk of foreign judges. My experience is that, and we ask for the involvement of foreign judges in whatever sort of process that takes place. But my experience with my father's assassination and the subsequent quote-unquote investigation that took place is that if ever that case went before the courts, I'm a qualified a lawyer by qualification. I practiced criminal law. So it is from that context that I am sharing my views. If the case against my father's assassination and the suspects who actually were killed by the government itself, but if they had survived and if the case had gone to trial, I can assure you that those two suspects would have got acquitted. And the reason why they would have got acquitted, assuming that the judge would have been a fair person, actually the foundations for the acquittal were laid in the investigation itself, in the way in which the evidence was gathered and in the way in which the evidence was being reported to court. Criminal law has very high standards of evidence that has to be submitted. The standard on burden of proof is very high, and therefore, since the threshold is so high, it is almost certain that the way in which the investigation was done, the accused would have got acquitted. Because it was deliberately done. I personally was witness to the way in which the police officer who was known as Shaw Vikramasinghe, he was a notorious officer. He was in charge of the Colombo Criminal Division. He is a political animal. And when he was appointed and the way in which he carried out the investigation, it was very obvious that he created contradictions in the way in which evidence was being recorded. So when it comes to any criminal justice process that we contemplate with regards to the grave crimes that we are talking of in the outcome of the war or the end of the war, I think the need for a foolproof investigative process is fundamental. That you have judges seated to give some sort of determination right at the end of the process is one thing. But at the beginning of the process, if we get the foundations wrong, then no matter how brilliant and honest and credible the judges and the bench may be, the case will fail. So in that context, do I have a time period? How much? Okay, so in that context, if you look at the High Commissioner's report that was submitted in September 2015, I think we welcome the report specifically. My organization welcomed the report specifically because he identified one of the most key issues with regards to concerns that we have, which is that the Sri Lankan judicial system has been so corrupted due to the 30-year war. The nature in which the system functions itself is not neutral. It has a huge ethnic bias. And consequently, such a system, without it being completely overhauled, would not be suitable for a domestic investigation. That was his finding. So he clearly rules out the Sri Lankan judicial system, not just individuals. He's rejecting the system in itself. And in that context, the High Commissioner calls for a hybrid. So one assumes that when you reject the local system in toto, until such time as serious reforms are done, that means the hybrid that is contemplated cannot and should not have that rejected system playing a part. Maybe credible individuals can be included, but certainly not a system that has been rejected. If you're not capable and you're not credible to hold an investigation yourself, then that whole system has to be kept out. So a credible hybrid, quote unquote, system ought to have been where control of the investigation, control of the the criminal justice process should be in the hands of the UN or some body that is credible in the eyes of the victims, but certainly not the Sri Lankan state. And in such a system, you could have had credible local individuals, and there are credible local individuals. Certainly they could have been incorporated. But unfortunately, the resolution that was passed in October 2015 did the complete opposite. It gave total control to the Sri Lankan government and simply asked that foreign individuals be incorporated. 1.5 years later, we have that Sri Lankan government rejecting even that element of foreign involvement that it itself signed on to. Now, why it is so important that we get the structure right for any criminal justice process is because of the gravity of the crimes that were committed. And I would like to conclude by just sharing with you, since there were incidents of surrender that were mentioned by my previous speakers, I just wish to share with you my experience, because I was also involved from the 16th of May 2009 till the 18th of May 2009. I was involved in trying to broker a surrender between the LTT, more importantly, to safely bring the civilian population into an accountable process, and also the LTT cadres into an accountable process so that their lives can be accounted for. Now, the process of negotiations, I was actually contacted by the LTT and asked to negotiate with the government. I was specifically told that Mr. Basil Rajapaksa, who was the younger brother of President Mahinda Rajapaksa, was in town and that I should contact him. And I did. And the entire purpose of my engagement was to make sure that there were some credible third parties involved in this process who could monitor this process. And my suggestion was that the ICRC actually be made party, that they mediate the process. The Sri Lankan government's response was that the ICRC have very strict rules with regards to surrender and the need to have everything above board with regards to accountability and stuff like that. So it will just take undue amounts of time. And the government rejected the ICRC involvement and suggested that they are willing to consider senior members of the clergy or even reputed lawyers that are acceptable to us to monitor the process. So in consultation with the LTT, we eventually agreed, both the government and the LTT agreed, that there will be two Catholic bishops, the Bishop of Mannar, Right Reverend Rayappa Joseph, and the Bishop of the East, then Right Reverend Kingsley Swampille, will accompany both Minister Basil Rajapaksa and myself to the war zone, to Mullaitivu. The LTT will send its political head, Mr. Naresan, to negotiate the terms.